Stopping slate.
Hello and welcome to Face to Face, a special United Nations press briefing with the President of the UN Economic and Social Council, His Excellency Ambassador Munir Akram. I am Martina Donlan from the UN Global Communications Department at headquarters in New York. And in a moment, we'll hear from the President on the work of the Economic and Social Council in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic and in accelerating action on the Sustainable Development Goals. Ambassador Akram is the 76th President of ECOSOC and the current permanent representative of Pakistan to the United Nations. As a career ambassador, he was already President of ECOSOC in 2005 and President of the Security Council twice in May 2003 and May 2004. He was also chair of the Group of 77 in China in 2007 and facilitator of the UN Administrative Reform in 2006. Today, Ambassador Akram will present his views and vision on how the Economic and Social Council, or ECOSOC, as one of the main organs of the United Nations, is responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. He will also announce the launch of an initiative towards a sustainable, resilient recovery. And he'll be happy to answer your questions, of course. So thank you all for joining. Ambassador Akram will make brief remarks and then take your questions. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Martina. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today, as we all know, we are suffering a grim crisis and facing another grim day in the fight against the coronavirus. The World Health Organization is recording a total death toll of 1.6 million people, and millions have been infected and are suffering. As the toll rises, we continue to deal also with severe disruptions in societies and economies around the world, with deep impacts on health, education, economic growth, financial displacement and stress, and breakdowns of social systems. And as usual, it is painfully obvious that the poor amongst us, the poorest countries and the poorest people in those countries, have been hit hardest with the loss of jobs and livelihoods, as well as affliction to the virus. Businesses, especially small businesses, are struggling to keep afloat. There are reports that over 20 countries are facing food insecurity, and there is a danger of famine in some of them. Public health systems in developing countries are under stress. So we need to fight the virus and the consequences of the virus. We have initial approval for some of the vaccines that have been developed in record time. And we must ensure that this vaccine becomes available to everyone, everywhere, rich or poor, man or woman, on an equitable basis. A vaccine must be seen as a global public good. And as the WHO Director General, Mr. Tedros, said, no one is safe until everyone is safe. It is also in every country's national and economic self-interest to work together to ensure that the tests are done, the treatments are coded, a vaccine is available to all who need it, so that we are able to deal with this virus on a global basis. Because unless we can put it down everywhere, it will spread again. The ACT, the accelerator, with its COVAX facility, is a groundbreaking collaboration between WHO and international parties to accelerate global access to tools that can rapidly reduce the risk of severe disease and help in the acute phase of the pandemic. We face problems in the equitable distribution of the vaccines that become available. The first issue are the advanced purchase agreements that have been made by some. And if economic nationalism prevails once again, it could become an impediment in the distribution of the vaccine equitably. The second issue is the intellectual property constraints, which could hinder the fair distribution or the widest possible distribution of the vaccine. And the third problem are the supply arrangements, which obviously are detrimental or disadvantage the developing countries where the vaccine is not being produced. So that is the first challenge. And I believe that support for the COVAX facility and similar facilities that are being contemplated will be important. And we hope that these will act with transparency and with equity in the distribution of the vaccine. But the consequences of the COVID virus, the impacts, are economic and social. And to deal with those consequences, we need to have an emergency response and a structural response. The emergency response basically is to generate and mobilize the financing that is required to enable the poorer countries to have the fiscal space to recover from the impacts of the COVID crisis. These emergency financing requirements are obvious and have been discussed in the Secretary General's, the process launched by the Secretary General together with Jamaica and Canada. And these responses, firstly, the alleviation of the crushing debt of developing countries. 5 developing countries have defaulted on their debt. Many more may follow. There could be collapse of businesses and entire economies as a result. Secondly, we need to generate additional liquidity for the developing countries. And the easiest way to inject additional liquidity would be the creation of new SDRs by the IMF and the redistribution of existing unutilized quotas of SDRs to those developing countries which need their liquidity. The private sector creditors must join the official creditors who have declared a suspension of debt until the end of June, the G20 has taken a decision, and that is a welcome decision. We need support for the COVAX facility. They are short of $5 billion. We need support for the Secretary General's emergency humanitarian program out of a ask for $1 billion, close to $1 billion. The funding has been disappointing. It is only about $140 million so far, and we need to make up that emergency financing. We need developed countries to live up to their commitments to the 0.7% ODA target. These are some of the emergency measures that we need to take to enable developing countries to recover from the crisis. Developed countries have injected $13 trillion to revive their economies. Developing countries are struggling to find a fraction of the 2 to 3 trillion that they need for COVID recovery. But apart from the emergency financing, there is a need for a structural change. The Secretary General has remarked that the hallmark of our times is inequality. He has said, and I quote him, "The response to the pandemic and to the widespread discontent that preceded it must be based on a new social contract and a new global deal that creates equal opportunities for all and respects the rights and freedoms of all." Unquote. We need structural change in the financial architecture. We need to align the international trade regime with the SDGs. We need a fair international taxation system where corporations are not able to shift profits to avoid tax. We need a halt in illicit financial flows, which takes away $30 to $300 billion every year from developing countries to safe havens, mostly in developed countries. These are some of the structural issues that need to be addressed. Another important aspect of structural change is the need for investment in sustainable infrastructure. If we are to build back better, as the Secretary General has said, and to build a new green economy which prevents and avoids the climate disaster that is facing us, we need to invest in sustainable infrastructure and to move away from the fossil fuel economy. The requirements for infrastructure investment annually are estimated to be about $1.5 trillion. So at the present moment, and before the COVID crisis, multilateral and bilateral sources were investing only about $70 billion in infrastructure in the developing countries. There is therefore need to accelerate this to build and to identify and build projects in developing countries on sustainable energy, sustainable agriculture, sustainable transport and housing. If we are to build back better so that we do not build back to the same patterns that have caused so much disaster in the world. I have therefore proposed the establishment of a facility which will be a public-private partnership to accelerate sustainable infrastructure investment in developing countries. And I'll be happy to elaborate this in response to your questions as with regard to the consultations that are underway on this facility. Lastly, we need to utilize science and technology and innovation to build back better, to recover from the pandemic, and to promote the sustainable development goals. I have identified science and technology as the third leg of my ambition. Firstly, finance. Secondly, sustainable infrastructure investment. And thirdly, the utilization of science and technology. The experience of the vaccine has showed that when we have a clear target for innovation, we are able to mobilize the resources and the research efforts to achieve that target. The COVID vaccine has been developed within 10 months or so. Similarly, we need to identify what are the innovations, what are the scientific breakthroughs, what are the available technologies that need to be applied for the promotion of the Sustainable Development Goals. I believe that such an identification is possible, and that once we have such an identification, an effort could be made to direct research and development institutions, especially public research and development institutions across the world, to endeavor to make those breakthroughs. Secondly, we need to see how to align the intellectual property regime with the SDGs. At the moment, there have been some exceptions. As we all know, the intellectual property rights, intellectual property regime patents can act as a constraint on the ability of developing countries to apply those technologies that are available. It is therefore important to see which technologies are critical for the Sustainable Development Goals, to eliminate hunger, to eliminate poverty, to address some of the climate disasters. What are the technologies that would be useful for developing countries? We need to make a database of such technologies and to see how we can facilitate their application and ease the intellectual property constraints that act to impede such application. And last but not least, in the sphere of technology, we need to digitalize the economies of the developing countries. Today, we are able to communicate with each other because we are connected over the internet. Connectivity in the industrial countries is over 80%. Connectivity in the developing countries is less than 20%. And therefore, 80% of the populations of developing countries today, under lockdowns, they are in the dark. They are left behind. They have no ability to communicate, to conduct commerce, to conduct business, to be able to lead a normal life because they are isolated, virtually and physically. Therefore, the digitalization, the closing of the gap, the digital gap between developed and developing countries, between vulnerable populations, women and children, minorities, and majorities. I think those gaps the digital gaps need to be addressed and overcome. And this requires a conscious effort. The Secretary General has spelled out a roadmap. We need to flesh that roadmap out. We need to identify precise actions that are required in financing, intellectual property, and other constraints that impede the bridging of the digital divide. So these are processes which I have launched. We have informal consultations underway on most of these processes. I have appointed co-facilitators for this science and technology event. I will be appointing facilitators on financing for development. And these will all come together in the various forums that ECOSOC will convene in the next year. Firstly, the Financing for Development Forum in April, the Science and Technology STI Forum in May, the Development Cooperation Forum, and lastly, the high-level political forum, which will be held in July. So the processes, the objectives and ambitions that I have outlined as main objectives for ECOSOC this year, these will all come together in these forums and finally in the high-level political forum. And I hope that we will be able to agree on an ambitious program, on ambitious decisions that can enable the international community to respond to the crisis that has been sparked by COVID, but also to respond to the challenge of the SDGs and the challenge of climate change that we are all confronting. I will stop here and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much, Martin.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for this really comprehensive overview and briefing. The floor is now open for questions. If you could please put your name in the chat and then I can call on you. And we will start with Valeria Robeco, President of the UN Correspondents Association. Valeria, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Ambassador, for this briefing. We just heard from a report at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health that as much as a quarter of the world population will likely not receive the COVID-19 vaccination until 2022. So I would like to have a comment from you, and if you think that with the COVAX facilities, and there is a chance to overcome this forecast, which is of course not an optimistic one. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Valeria, and thank you. That's an important question, and it's an important challenge we all face. And I believe that, like everything, it depends on political will to be able to rectify such a prognosis. The vaccine supply is going to be available. We hope that through the COVAX facility, there will be complete transparency with regard to the production and location of the vaccine production. We hope that there will be quickly an identification of the most vulnerable populations, whether these are health workers in the host countries or where the vaccines are being produced, or these are health workers and vulnerable people in developing countries. And this will be a test, an acid test of international solidarity, that the priority which is being accorded nationally to to health workers and older people in, say, the United States or in Europe, that priority is extended to similar vulnerable groups in developing countries, and that they should take precedence over others in the availability of the vaccine. It's a question of political will. We can change this projection, which is a pessimistic projection, perhaps a realistic one, but it is up to governments to be able to decide that they will allocate a portion of the vaccine production for other countries, for developing countries, for the vulnerable in developing countries. So this will be an acid test, and certainly we as developing countries, as international actors here at the United Nations, we must press for this equity, and I hope that we will do so.
Next, we have a question from the AP of Pakistan. Iftikhar, please.
Hello?
Iftikhar, we can't hear you.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Ambassador, thank you for this briefing. In your opening remarks, you spoke about that you have proposed creation of a facility for infrastructure development. Could you please elaborate a bit what kind of mechanism it will be, under whose sponsorship it will operate? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Iftikhar. This is the suggestion for the facility arises from two gaps that we are facing. One is the fact that there is very little policy harmonization on infrastructure investment. Different countries have different regulations. The requirements for investment in various countries are regulated nationally, and there is no connection at the moment between the developing countries which have the opportunities for investment and the investors and the investor communities. As I said, the gap in investment in infrastructure is so large, and we have tried to understand why this is so. There are already 12 mechanisms that have been set up by various institutions, the World Bank, the AAIP, and the G20 and so forth. But so far, this has not resulted in investment in developing countries to the level that is required. And that we're trying to create this facility to connect, to bridge the gap that is preventing investment. So the idea is, firstly, to have a policy board which can harmonize policies with regard to sustainable infrastructure investment. Various proposals are on the table from both the private sector and from public sector institutions, and we need to harmonize that and to bring all the actors together in one place. So that's the first objective. The second objective is to utilize the vast country-level system that the UN has. The United Nations has country representatives, resident representatives, UNDP resident representatives, resident coordinators in over 130 countries in the world. These representatives are in constant touch with developing country governments and are familiar with the plans and requirements of these countries. They are excellent instruments to be able to identify the possible infrastructure projects, to help the developing countries build the capacity to formulate good pre-feasibility and feasibility studies for those projects. And the facility would be designed to find the right partners for those projects in the investment world. That's the simple explanation. It's a little, obviously, the discussions are ongoing. It is, there are various points of view with regard to the nature of the private-public partnership we would have as to where this facility could be located. The basic point is that it should be a public-private partnership which brings together all the actors, developing countries, the donor countries, the United Nations system, as well as the investor community. We need to bring them all together on one platform so that they're able to communicate with each other and to make the connection that will enable the investors to have the confidence to invest in developing countries. That's a simple explanation, and I hope that as the consultations go forward, we will have a more concrete proposal to be able to share with all of you and all our colleagues in ECOSOC.
Thank you. Next, we have a question from Sherwin Bryce-Pease at South African Broadcasting. Sherwin.
Hi, thanks. Good afternoon, Ambassador Akram. Russia and the United States, what do you make of their decision not to join the COVAX facility, and how do you view that exclusion affecting the equitable access and distribution of vaccines? And in addition to that, Ambassador, President Donald Trump signed an executive order a couple of weeks ago that seeks to address vaccine needs of American citizens first, before other nations will have access to vaccines that were developed in the United States. What do you make of that decision?
Yes, yes, this is obviously some of the things that I was referring to as impediments to equitable distribution. Obviously, it would be best if both Russia and the United States were to join the COVAX facility, and certainly we hope that the United States, which has produced the first 2 approved vaccines, that it will also participate as a contributor to the international effort that we would hope will be launched for an equitable distribution of the vaccine. I can only say that we look forward to the policy positions of the incoming US administration, and we hope that these policies will be an expression of American solidarity, not only with its own people, but also with the global population.
Thank you. Next, we have a question from Al-Quds Al-Arabiya, Abdelhamid.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Munir. Thank you for this briefing. I have a similar question. I mean, how do you see the US administration, the incoming administration, returning back to WHO? How could that help the global efforts for universal distribution of the vaccine? The second related question is that you see that WHO has some efforts in that field, the Office of the Secretary General, ECOSOC. There are different facilities that working on that. Why the UN system in general could not put one office in charge, similar to what happened in of the pandemic, the AIDS, when they have UN AIDS, which was a central office to coordinate and work with that to stop that pandemic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. With regard to your first question about the incoming administration, I think if the incoming administration did indeed rejoin the WHO, we hope that it will also join the COVAX facility and the Act. And if it does, it would be a good indication of its willingness to participate in the efforts of the COVAX facility to ensure equitable distribution of the vaccine. This is, of course, presumption at the moment, but a re-entry of the United States into WHO would be a very welcome development and I think essential for equitable distribution. As far as the UN establishing one office, I think the focus is on the COVAX. There is another proposal that was made by Costa Rica, which is voluntary at the moment, but which was a more broader and more equitable distribution concept. But so far, the general consensus is that everybody is gathering around the COVAX facility as the principal coordinating mechanism for the distribution of the vaccine. So this is what we have to work with, and we should try to see that the COVAX facility works with transparency, that it is not impeded by the advance purchase agreements, that it is not impeded by nationalistic positions which exclude export of vaccines or from where they are being produced. These are some of the things that we hope that the COVAX facility will be able to address. Transparency, equity in distribution, exportability to other countries. These are important issues which it will have to address, and we look forward to that because this is going to be an acid test of global solidarity.
And next we have Anwar Iqbal. Anwar, do you want to introduce yourself? Anwar, you had put the question in the chat.
Hello, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hi, I'm Anwar. I work for Pakistan's Dawn newspaper. And my question to the ambassador is Pakistan is specific. So, ambassador, can you please also highlight the pandemic's impact on Pakistan, what Pakistan is doing to deal with it, and what should the international community do to help Pakistan come out of this crisis?
Well, as you probably know, we in Pakistan, we were able to deal fairly well with the first surge of COVID. The government adopted a policy of what they call smart lockdowns, which reduced the impact on the entire economy. So the economic contraction was limited. The government also injected a $8 billion package to stimulate the economy, especially to distribute cash and in-kind support to those who were jobless or those who lived on daily wages, to poor and vulnerable people. And this was done utilizing digital technology, which ensured an efficient and equitable distribution. And it reduced the impact of the crisis, both the economic impact on the poorest amongst the population. The economy, of course, has contracted like other economies, but the contraction has been, I believe, around 5%, and there seem to be signs of a robust recovery that is underway. Exports in Pakistan are up. The construction and industry has been provided support, and so job creation through the construction industry and the agricultural industry is robust, and hopefully these are good signs. But we are now experiencing a second surge, and we have to deal with the second surge, and hopefully we will be able to deal with it as well as we did the initial surge. But it still remains a challenge, and we are still in challenging space.
Thank you. And next we have Elena Lenza from the Lusa News Agency. Elena, please.
Hello, good morning, Ambassador. Thank you so much for the briefing. My question is again about equity, solidarity. I know that ECOSOC is underlying the need for solidarity and equity in everything that you have been talking, but how to ensure that the new initiatives that you announced are going to reach everywhere? And is there going to be a difference between countries that are members of ECOSOC and others that aren't? And looking, for example, into the community of the Portuguese-speaking countries, because that's what I work on, we have Brazil and Angola that are members of ECOSOC, but we have other countries who are poor and are not members. So how are we going to ensure that every country can participate and also have benefits in any way they can?
Thank you, Elena. I think as far as the solidarity and equity is concerned, that's a principle that we must follow. It is inherent in the SDGs. This is the purpose of the SDGs, is to promote equitable development. And we cannot do it without international cooperation and solidarity. Of course, it remains to be seen how much international solidarity will be available. As I said, the distribution of the vaccine will be a first and acid test of this solidarity. A lot of countries, a lot of governments have spoken eloquently about the need for solidarity and cooperation and multilateralism. But we will have to see how they live up to the statements and declarations that they have professed. It remains, but in ECOSOC, obviously, this will be our guiding principle. It will guide every effort and decision that we try to make in ECOSOC. With regard to participation, as you know, in most of the forums that we will have, the FFD, the STI Technology Forum, Development Cooperation Forum, ECOSOC is open not only to member states, but it's also open to non-member states of the Council. And moreover, we have several mechanisms through which to bring in civil society as well as the private sector. In the FFD, for example, there is an investment fair on the side, and that investment fair, the private sector and the developing countries are brought together to exchange information on specific projects for investment in developing countries. So that's just one example of the interaction between member states and the private sector. The HLPF is a forum which is convened by ECOSOC, but it is a forum in which all the members of the United Nations participate. All 193 countries participate in the HLPF. So every country, small, big, everyone is represented in the HLPF process and in the consensus that we try to achieve in the HLPF process, which is the apex of everything that we will do through the year. We will try to bring it together in the HLPF. There is a ministerial declaration at the end, and that's the final act of the ECOSOC session in late July. So that's how we will bring together, hopefully we'll bring together all member states as well as other stakeholders.
And the next and last question goes to IRNA, the Iranian news agency. Mohsen, you have the floor.
Thank you. Hello, Ambassador. My question is about the unilateral coercive measures of the United States against Iran and some other countries. As you know, these measures make it difficult for them to access the vaccine and treatment of the coronavirus. What can the United Nations agencies do to solve this humanitarian problem?
Thank you, Mohsen. That is an important question. As you know, this is a question which has been discussed in many consultations and meetings that have been held in recent months throughout this COVID crisis. I believe that the principle of international solidarity should extend to all peoples, regardless of political considerations. And my hope and aspiration is that we will find a way in which to express that solidarity through the deliberations of the Economic and Social Council. I hope that the crisis and the magnitude of the crisis, the human suffering that is now visible, that this will generate the solidarity that is required to ensure that all peoples have access to the medical and other requirements that they need to save lives and livelihoods. So this is an aspiration. I am well aware of the difficulties that are faced by certain countries, but this is part of the effort to build solidarity, and we hope that with changing circumstances in the world, that we could see a revival of international solidarity.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you, everybody, for joining. We will end here, but we hope to see you all soon again for another face-to-face with the President of ECOSOC next year. So until then, thank you all and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you.